Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's Seekers session. I hope you're having a great weekend. And let's say hi to Jay Copley. How are you, Jay?
Hello, Mark. It's good to see you and good to be here.
Good to see you too. Jay is in the Dallas airport, y'all. So that's what I call dedication. He's about to get on a flight. So, okay, so this month we're looking at the path of the mystic and what a transcendental perspective teaches us about the experience of unity in a world that's full of diversity. Embodying unity is the goal of all spirituality, of course, to awaken to what Ralph Waldo Emerson called the one mind or the oversoul, which is the terminus or the endpoint of mystical awakening. When it comes to mysticism, though, the notion of there being some kind of a path is actually a misnomer because there is no single trail that we follow into mystic awareness. In the words of the great J. Krishnamurti, who was my first spiritual love, the truth is a pathless land. The truth is a pathless land. So when it comes to mysticism and spiritual experience generally, conventional language generally just fails us. Words are nothing but fingers pointing at the moon, as the Buddha put it. What's more, the term mysticism itself is largely misunderstood. When you talk about mysticism in our culture, people have images of some woo-woo, woolly-headed, superstitious kind of belief system that's lost in the clouds and devoid of reason. But in truth, mysticism is grounded in nature, and it's also supported by much of what we've come to learn about how the universe works from quantum physics, for example. Mystics and physicists both understand that there's an underlying unity in nature and that there are no hard boundaries between things, which are themselves not what they appear to be. Everything is porous and permeable. There are no hard boundaries. Physicists and mystics also understand that the diverse elements of the world are joined by a kind of mysterious substance or consciousness, that we exist as cells in a greater body circumscribed by this consciousness, held within it, and that our deepest yearning is to remember our connection to this greater whole. The great scholar of mysticism, Evelyn Underhill, put it this way. She wrote, "Mysticism is nothing more or less than the innate tendency of the human spirit toward complete harmony with the transcendental order." Let me repeat that. Mysticism is the innate tendency of the human spirit toward complete harmony with the transcendental order, unquote. And that's something that all of us feel. It's hardwired into us. It's in our nature to move toward unity, to remember in the sense of putting parts back together, where we came from and where we're going. Mystic awareness makes us aware of our common origins. We come to recognize ourselves as family, familial with everyone and with everything. The 18th century French philosopher Saint-Martin noted that, quote, "all mystics come from the same country and speak the same language." All mystics come from the same country and speak the same language. And it's this territory, this country, that we're going to be exploring this month in the Seekers Forum. The language of mysticism is one that's characterized by deep silence, by a freedom from egocentric concerns, and an easeful way of interacting with the world rather than fighting with conditions as they are. What happens with mystic awakening is that the background becomes the foreground. Most of the time, we move through our lives with material reality in the foreground, the 1,001 things that flesh is heir to. And somewhere in the background, we imagine there's this mysterious, invisible thing called spirit. The mystic reverses that perspective. The unity becomes the foreground. And that brings with it feelings of timelessness, of seamless connection, of opening, of tenderness, and of love. The good news is that we are all viscerally equipped for these experiences. We're viscerally equipped. They're as natural to us as waking, sleeping, and dreaming. In fact, we have glimpses of mystic consciousness very often in our lives without calling it that. Whether we're spending time in nature or looking at art or doing spiritual practice, listening to music, witnessing beauty, making love, or after physical exhaustion. Even experiences of struggle and suffering can be openings to mystic awareness. The truth is that extreme experiences of all kinds have the power to crack through the wall that surrounds the ego mind and reveal the light that's beyond our self-centered ignorance. Great masters and sages understand this, and they encourage their students to move toward their pain, for example, to view loss and adversity as doorways to freedom, knowing that the chamber of mystic awareness can be reached by many different doorways. There's a strange story about the great 20th century Indian saint Anandamoy Ma. A devotee had come to her after losing a child and was just overcome with grief and seeking emotional comfort. But instead of wrapping her arms around the woman, Anandamoy Ma just started laughing and laughing until tears flowed down her face. The disciple was completely shocked and asked, why was Anandamoy Ma laughing at her misery? And the saint replied, because you are being shown the end of misery through the cracks that this misery is opening in your heart. Through them, you can see the sun of the self shining. Isn't that amazing? So instead of just responding to the woman's emotional suffering, as one would, someone from a mystic perspective sees not only the suffering and feels, of course, deep compassion for the suffering, but also sees that it's a crack in the heart that lets the sun of the self shine through. So Anandamoy Ma wasn't being insensitive to the woman's emotional loss, but she saw it against a backdrop of a greater truth, the unity of being, the light of God. So when we approach our lives in this way and see impermanence in all its forms as a crack through which the sun of the self can shine, it inverts our experience of suffering. It puts it into a larger container, a transcendental container. I had an experience of this kind many years ago at a time of severe emotional distress in my own life. And I want to tell you about it only because it created a new standard of perspective in my life that has really never gone away. I was on a beach in Mahabalipuram, which is on the southeast corner of India, late in one afternoon in the 1980s. And it was shortly after I had met my own teacher, Mother Meera. I was going through a severe health crisis, and I was just exhausted, worn out. My friend and I had rented a room on the beach for a few weeks of rest and relaxation. And at the end of our beach was a world-famous Shiva temple that pilgrims visited from around the world. One night we went out for a walk, and we were completely dumbstruck by the beauty of the sunset. The temple was silhouetted against an opal sky, and the biggest moon I've ever seen, the color of yellow pearl, was resting right on the tip of the horizon. We sat down on the beach to meditate, and I stared for a long time at the moon before I closed my eyes. As soon as I did that, Mother Meera's face appeared in my inner vision and seemed to converge with the moon's image. Her face seemed to be alive. It wasn't like a photograph. And as I looked into her eyes inwardly, I felt my body leaning forward as if I were touching her feet the way we do during darshan, the blessing ceremony. So I laid my hands, palms down on the sand, and in that second, a wave crashed on the beach, and it sent a shudder through the ground and into my body. I don't know what happened, but somehow in my exhausted state, that vibration through the earth, the sound of the wave, Mother Meera's face, and the light of the moon seemed to come together to jolt me awake. When I opened my eyes, I was in an altered state. I wasn't hallucinating. There were no visions, no distortions. It was just an intensification of sight and a strange sense of omnipresence, not omniscience, but omnipresence, as if I were part of everything around me. I felt embodied with the landscape. My vision felt deeper and higher and clearer than before. The clouds, the water, my hands in my lap all seemed to be pulsating together very softly. I had the distinct impression that I wasn't just seeing the surface of things, but was actually knowing them. I could hear my friends shouting behind me, but it seemed unnecessary to talk, so I just kept walking down the beach toward the temple, aware that I was in this trance because there was a part of my mind that was watching me from the outside as I was walking. I noticed my breathing changed. It wasn't like I was breathing. It felt like I was being breathed by this force that was moving the water and moving the palm fronds and moving the waves. We all were being breathed by that same essence, that same consciousness that was connecting all of us. And I had the weird perception that if I moved my arm, it would somehow displace the branch of a tree in the distance. The breeze itself seemed alive and intelligent. Well, this altered state lasted for the next 12 hours. I eventually started to tell my friend about what was happening, and we spent the day together, talking and eating and eventually walking home. Nothing we did interrupted this state. When I finally drifted off to sleep, part of me remained completely awake and watched me sleeping. In the morning when I woke up, there was a kind of afterglow, but the experience was over. I felt rested and confused by what had happened, unable to explain that shift that was so spontaneous. Many years later, now I understand that as pleasant as that little trip was, the reason it mattered is that it opened me to the mysterious. It made me more susceptible to wonder and to all those levels of awareness and ways of being that I hadn't experienced and wasn't even aware of. It was as if a couple of bricks in my wall of ignorance had fallen away, revealing just for half a day, 12 hours, the secret order of things that I assumed after that is always beyond our reckoning. It's always there. As seekers, it's extremely important to sensitize ourselves to mystery, to pay attention to the uncanny, inexplicable dimension of being alive. Some people have argued, in fact, that nothing matters more than that. In his letters to a young poet, Rainer Maria Rilke insisted that the only courage that's required of us is to face, quote, the strangest, most unusual, most inexplicable experiences that can meet us. He goes on to say that the experiences that are called apparitions, the whole so-called spirit world, death, all these things that are so closely related to us have been so entirely pushed out of life that the senses with which we might have grasped them have atrophied, to say nothing of God. And that really is our situation. That we pushed away the uncanny, pushed away the mysterious and the wondrous to such a degree that the senses with which we might have been able to grasp them have actually atrophied. But that doesn't mean they can't be rebuilt with practice and with awareness. In our demystified world, and this is a demystified world, a world where we imagine that the human brain is the high point of all creation. In a world like that, with so much ego and so much insistence on human arrogance, cultivating this courage for the uncanny and the mysterious is paramount. Remaining open to what we can't understand, but can experience beyond our five sensory consciousness. So ask yourself, are you open to mystery? Are you open to exploring the invisible order of things? Or are you deceived by appearances into forgetting the spiritual unity of the world? Do you recognize your own innate pull, your attraction to wholeness, and what Evelyn Underhill called the secret transcendental order? It helps to remind ourselves that mystic awareness is a natural part of our repertoire, as I was just saying, and that it can be strengthened through practice. Even though mystical experience can't be engineered, the closest thing to engineering mystical experience that we have is psychoactive substances like psilocybin, ayahuasca, and so on. We can't, without the help of psychoactive substances, engineer mystical experience, but we can create the conditions through practice that sensitize us to spiritual awakening. And I'd just like to suggest 6 such factors in spiritual awakening that we do have control over that we can actually give ourselves more of. And the first is spending time in nature. There's really no replacement for being in the untamed, non-man-made world. In nature, our cognition is shifted from separation to connection. We are refreshed and replenished by nature. As Emerson put it, no matter how miserable we are at any given time, in the woods is perpetual youth. That when we move into nature, the child in us is roused. And of course, the mystic child is a central figure in many spiritual traditions. That childlike, youthful, exuberant, curious, open, unfolding aspect of who we are. So finding ways to touch wilderness of whatever kind you can sensitizes you to the transpersonal, and it invites mystic awareness. The next portal to mysticism is beauty. Beauty. Whatever transports you has the potential to initiate you into this unified awareness that we're talking about. It absorbs the mind, it pauses thinking, and it deepens the experience of being present. So we're wise to surround ourselves with beauty, both physical and moral, exposing ourselves to people and to things that give us joy, that delight us, that arouse feelings of gratitude and gladness. There's an emotion that has now been identified in the laboratory called elevation, and it's the sense of expansion that we feel in the presence of moral beauty, in the presence of heroism and courage and selflessness. That sense that we want to grow toward that ourselves. That is a mystic impulse. Another doorway to mysticism and mystic awareness is silence. If I had been on a beach in Miami, for example, it's very unlikely that I would have had that experience that I had in Mahabalipuram. The mind requires silence to slow down its gears and pick up the pulsations of emptiness. Emptiness in the Buddhist sense of this container of consciousness that we find ourselves in. Silence offers space for the mind, a melting away of stimulation and distraction, a kind of container for awareness where we can just be. So ask yourself, how can you bring more silence into your life today? Are you comfortable with solitude? And if you're not, are you aware of what you're missing by constantly distracting yourself, filling your head with this and that, and missing the spaciousness of simply being, the spaciousness of being present? Another portal to mystic awareness is being in the presence of a sage or a guru. There's an energetic shift that happens around genuine spiritual masters that is, in my experience, undeniable. It's a bit like being a piece of burning kindling next to a conflagration. It's like the light in you increases and grows toward that greater light. No real master wants your power. This is very important to understand. They're there to nourish you with who they are. Spiritual authority can be dangerous, as we all know, and it's very important to be mindful of not infantilizing ourselves to a teacher, putting them on some kind of a parental pedestal. But knowing that such great souls exist and taking time to spend time around them can be a great quickener in spiritual life. We realize that what they have or what they're reflecting is us in potentia. It reminds us of our own spiritual potential. I can say for myself that I was far too cynical and far too skeptical to have had any kind of spiritual experience had I not been in the presence of someone who was in this state of mystic awareness. It was unlike anything I had experienced before, and I knew it in my body. And it's something that had verifiable proofs inside me and also in my experience, down the years. The next paradoxical portal to mystic awareness is pain. Pain. As you heard in that anecdote about Anandamoy Ma, pain really does have the potential to wake us up to interconnection. There are many, many examples of people who have experienced mystic awakening in the bowels of hell. Stephen Levine used to tell a story about a woman that he worked with in hospice, who had a terrible, terrible personality. She was mean, mean as a snake, he said. Just didn't have a kind word to say about anyone, had no gratitude. The staff couldn't stand her, stayed out of her room. And then one day, a few days, I think it was within a week before her death, the woman was lying on her side in pain on her bed, and she suddenly realized that she had images in her mind. She had an image of a woman in Africa lying on her side giving birth. She had another image of a woman on her side in pain in jail. She realized she felt this complete connection with all the women lying on their side in pain on the planet. And it shifted something in her. She became much more generous. She became kind in a way she had never demonstrated before, a kind of a love light, so that by the time she died, a few days after this experience, her room was a place of gathering, of joy. People wanted to be with her. Her family came to visit. And there was a major external transformation because she had had that mystic awakening. It melted something in her heart, the walls that she had used to protect herself. And that brings us to the last doorway to mystic awareness, which is the most obvious, which is love. To be a mystic is to embody love. As Rumi reminds us, at every instant and from every side resounds the call for love. At every instant and from every side resounds the call for love. And that's that sound, that call that we begin to respond to as the mystic is sensitized in us. How we answer that call for love determines the value of our lives. We come to see that love is transpersonal at its core, that its essence isn't bound to one form or another. It's more like a magnetism that attracts forms to one another. The Zoroastrians believed that gravity and love were one and the same. They thought that the planets are actually held in orbit by the power of love, which I find to be such a beautiful image of a cosmos that coheres through the force of love itself. So just imagine seeing the world that way, illuminated and brightened by the force of love. That's the prospect and the promise that we're going to be considering together this month in the Seekers Forum. So that's what I wanted to say to you to introduce the Mystic Path this evening. And now let's move into some writing. Jay, why don't we pull up the card? Here we go. I'd like you now, please, to take 20 minutes to explore what you think of when you hear the word mysticism. What does mysticism mean to you and why? Be as specific as you can, please. We'll take 20 minutes to do that. 10 minutes in, you'll have the opportunity to join a breakout room if you would like to connect with other members. Otherwise, just keep on writing. 20 minutes.